There is a conversation that almost never happens in a routine doctor's appointment. Not because there is no time for it, though there rarely is, and not because the doctor does not know about it, though many are not trained to raise it. It does not happen because both parties are waiting for the other to bring it up first, and neither one does. And so, men leave that appointment with blood pressure checked, cholesterol reviewed, and prostate noted, but without ever hearing the one piece of information that could be quietly and profoundly affecting their health every single day. That conversation is about masturbation. And if you are a man in your later years who has stopped, reduced, or altogether abandoned this practice, I need you to understand what that decision is doing to your body. Not to embarrass you, not to lecture you, but because the clinical evidence is clear. The physiological consequences are real, and you deserve to have this information in the same direct, factual way you deserve to know about your cholesterol or your blood sugar. I am Dr. Julia Rhodes, a men's sex therapist with over a decade of experience working with different couples and helping men regain their sexual health and strength back. In my clinical work with men in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, few topics come up as consistently or carry as much unnecessary shame as this one. And few topics have as much genuine, evidence-based relevance to the long-term health of the men I work with. Today, I am going to walk you through 7 major physiological consequences of stopping masturbation in later life. I will explain what is happening biologically, what that means emotionally, and what it looks like practically in the day-to-day life of a real man. And then, I am going to tell you exactly what you can do about it starting today. Before we get into the content, please subscribe to this channel right now if you have not already done so, and turn on your notifications. I publish new content every week specifically designed to give men the kind of honest, clinically grounded health information that deserves far more space than a 7-minute appointment can provide. Share this video with a man in your life who needs to hear this. You might be sharing something that genuinely changes the trajectory of his health. Now, let us get into it. First, I want to say something important about the context of this conversation, because I am aware that for many men watching, the topic itself will already feel uncomfortable. We live in a culture that gives men very little permission to speak openly about sexual self-care, particularly as they age. There is a pervasive and damaging myth that sexual desire, sexual activity, and sexual self-care are the domain of younger men, and that as men age, these things become irrelevant, inappropriate, or somehow undignified. That myth is not just wrong, it is actively harmful. It causes men to abandon practices that are genuinely physiologically beneficial, not because of any medical reason to do so, but because of cultural conditioning that tells them they should. I want to be completely clear about this from the outset. Sexual self-care in later life is not indulgent. It is not inappropriate. It is not something you should feel any shame about. It is a legitimate and clinically meaningful component of maintaining your physical health, your mental health, your hormonal health, and your overall quality of life as you age. And the decision to stop, whether made consciously or through gradual habit, carries real consequences that your body registers even when you do not. Let us go through all 7 of them. Consequence 1. Deterioration of prostate health and urinary function. The prostate gland produces a fluid that forms part of semen, and that in an actively functioning reproductive system is regularly expelled through ejaculation. When ejaculation stops occurring, whether through cessation of partnered sexual activity, masturbation, or both, that prostatic fluid does not simply disappear. It accumulates. And stagnant prostatic fluid creates a biological environment that is associated with inflammation, swelling, and the kinds of cellular changes that researchers have linked to increased risk of prostate conditions, including prostatitis, and in the longer term, prostate cancer. The clinical evidence here is compelling. A landmark study published in the European Urology Journal followed over 30,000 men over 18 years and found that those who ejaculated most frequently had a substantially lower risk of developing prostate cancer than those who ejaculated least frequently. The association held up across age groups, including men in their 60s and beyond. And the proposed mechanism is precisely what I have described. Regular ejaculation flushes the prostate of stagnant secretions, reduces the opportunity for carcinogenic compounds to concentrate in the prostatic tissue, and maintains the healthy cellular environment that protects against malignant change. In my clinical work, I frequently see men in their late 60s and 70s presenting with lower urinary tract symptoms, including reduced stream strength, increased urinary frequency, the need to get up multiple times per night to urinate, a sense of incomplete bladder emptying, and pelvic discomfort, who have not made the connection between these symptoms and the cessation of regular ejaculation. These symptoms are often attributed entirely to benign prostatic hyperplasia, which is the age-related enlargement of the prostate. And while BPH is certainly a contributing factor in many men, the inflammatory component driven by fluid stagnation is frequently and unnecessarily overlooked. Regular ejaculation does not reverse BPH, but it does maintain the health of the prostatic tissue, reduce the inflammatory burden on the gland, and support the urinary function that is so central to your daily independence and comfort. Think about what urinary disruption actually means in practice for a man in his 70s. It means interrupted sleep every single night. It means planning every outing around the location of the nearest bathroom. It means anxiety in situations where bathroom access is uncertain. It means a progressive narrowing of the life you are living, driven not by age itself, but by an avoidable deterioration in prostate health that had a simple, natural, cost-free means of prevention that nobody told you about. That is the conversation I want to make sure you are having, even if your doctor has not had it with you yet. Consequence 2. Cognitive fog, reduced mental clarity, and declining neurological health. Sexual activity, including masturbation and orgasm, triggers a significant and clinically meaningful neurochemical cascade in the brain. During sexual arousal and orgasm, the brain releases dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with motivation, reward, and focused attention. It releases serotonin, which regulates mood, emotional stability, and cognitive processing. It releases oxytocin, which is associated with feelings of connection, well-being, and stress reduction. And it releases endorphins, the body's endogenous opioids, which create feelings of pleasure and calm. This neurochemical release is not merely pleasant, it is protective. These are precisely the neurotransmitters and signaling molecules that support healthy cognitive function, that protect against the neuroinflammation associated with cognitive decline, and that maintain the brain's capacity for focus, memory consolidation, and emotional regulation. When sexual activity stops and these neurochemical surges no longer occur with any regularity, the brain loses a consistent source of neurological stimulation and chemical protection that it had been receiving. In men over 60, this matters particularly because this is already an age of heightened risk for cognitive decline, reduced neuroplasticity, and the early stages of conditions like mild cognitive impairment that can progress toward dementia if insufficient protective factors are in place. The neurochemical benefits of regular orgasm are not a cure for cognitive aging, but they are a meaningful and natural protective factor that adds to the overall environment in which your brain is either thriving or declining. In my practice, I hear men describe this as a kind of dulling. Things that used to be interesting feel flat. Focus that used to come easily now requires effort. Memory feels less reliable. Mornings feel foggy in a way that takes hours to clear. These descriptions are consistent with a brain that is receiving less regular neurochemical stimulation than it was designed to have. And they are frequently, though not exclusively, connected to the cessation of sexual activity. Consequence 3. Increased depression, emotional numbness, and psychological withdrawal. The endorphin and oxytocin release associated with orgasm has a direct and measurable effect on mood. These chemicals are natural antidepressants. They create a sense of well-being, calm, and emotional connection with the self that persists for some time after the experience. When this regular biochemical contribution to emotional health is absent, the baseline emotional state of many men shifts. Not necessarily into clinical depression, though in some cases it does, but into a kind of grayness, a flatness, a reduced capacity for pleasure, enthusiasm, and engagement with life. Men in later life are already at elevated risk for depression and emotional isolation for a range of reasons. The loss of professional identity through retirement, the deaths of friends and partners, reduced social engagement, declining physical capacity, and the existential weight of facing the final chapter of a long life. Many of these men are navigating genuinely difficult emotional terrain with inadequate support. Against that backdrop, the loss of even one regular source of natural mood support and endorphin release is not a trivial matter. The emotional disconnection that can develop when men abandon all forms of physical self-care and intimacy is also worth naming directly. There is something that happens when a man stops touching his own body with care and attention, when the body becomes purely functional rather than something to be tended to and inhabited with presence. A kind of psychological distance develops between the man and his own physical self. He begins to experience his body as a machine that requires maintenance rather than a living part of his identity. And that distance, that dissociation from the self, feeds emotional numbness in ways that compound over time. In my clinical experience, the men who are most likely to describe this kind of emotional flatness are those who have been without a partner for some years, who have had no sexual activity of any kind for an extended period, and who have quietly accepted the idea that this dimension of their experience is simply over. They are not in acute crisis, they are simply less alive in a way that they cannot quite articulate, and that nobody around them can quite see. Reconnecting with physical self-care and intimacy is one of the most direct ways back from that flatness, not as a replacement for the broader emotional support and connection that these men may also need, but as a genuine and meaningful first step toward reclaiming a fuller experience of being alive. Consequence 4. Disrupted sleep architecture and chronic fatigue. Orgasm triggers a specific and powerful neurochemical shift in the nervous system that is directly relevant to sleep quality. Following orgasm, the body releases a surge of prolactin, a hormone that is associated with feelings of deep relaxation and satiation. It also releases additional oxytocin and endorphins. The combined effect of these neurochemicals is to shift the autonomic nervous system from its active, alert sympathetic state into the calm, restorative parasympathetic state that is necessary for the onset and maintenance of deep, restful sleep. For men over 60 who are already dealing with the natural changes in sleep architecture that accompany aging, including reduced time in slow-wave sleep, increased sleep fragmentation, earlier morning waking, and the effects of any medications they may be taking, the loss of this natural sleep-promoting mechanism is physiologically significant. Men who were previously able to fall asleep readily and sleep soundly may begin to experience difficulty initiating sleep, more frequent night waking, a reduced sense of rest upon waking, and the daytime fatigue and cognitive impairment that chronic poor sleep produces. The downstream consequences of poor sleep in men over 60 are themselves a significant health concern. Chronic sleep deprivation is associated with elevated cortisol, impaired immune function, accelerated cognitive decline, increased cardiovascular risk, worsened insulin sensitivity, and reduced testosterone production. It compounds virtually every other health challenge a man in this age group is navigating, and yet its connection to the cessation of sexual self-care is almost never discussed in clinical consultations. Consequence 5. Weakening of the pelvic floor, reduced circulation, and accelerated erectile decline. The pelvic floor is a group of muscles that form the base of the pelvis and that play a critical role in bladder and bowel control, core stability, lower back support, and sexual function. In men, healthy pelvic floor function is essential for the muscle contractions that accompany ejaculation, for the vascular control mechanisms that maintain erections, and for the urinary continence that is so central to dignity and independence in later life. Masturbation and orgasm involve rhythmic, involuntary contractions of the pelvic floor muscles. These contractions are, in the most literal sense, a form of exercise for these critical muscles. When sexual activity of any kind stops entirely, the pelvic floor muscles lose this regular source of stimulation and exercise. Over time, they weaken. And weakened pelvic floor muscles mean reduced bladder control, increased risk of urinary leakage, reduced support for the core and lower back, and importantly, diminished erectile function, because the muscles responsible for compressing the veins that maintain an erection are part of the same group. Additionally, regular sexual arousal and genital blood flow play an important role in maintaining the health of the penile tissue itself. Oxygen-rich blood flowing through the erectile tissue during arousal helps maintain its elasticity, the health of the smooth muscle cells within it, and the responsiveness of the nerve endings that make sexual sensation possible. When arousal and genital blood flow stop occurring regularly over months and years, the penile tissue undergoes a form of disuse atrophy. The smooth muscle cells become fibrotic, the tissue becomes less elastic, and the capacity for erection declines more rapidly than it would have under conditions of regular sexual activity. This is the physiological basis of the clinical principle, often described as use it or lose it, and in men over 60, it is not a platitude. It is a documented biological reality. Consequence 6. Suppression of immune function and increased inflammatory load. Research has consistently demonstrated that regular sexual activity is associated with measurable enhancements in immune function. Specifically, studies have found that individuals who engage in sexual activity regularly have significantly higher levels of immunoglobulin A, which is one of the body's primary antibodies and a key first-line defense against respiratory and gastrointestinal infections. IgA is present in the mucous membranes of the mouth, nose, and gut, and it plays a critical role in the body's ability to prevent pathogens from establishing themselves before the deeper immune response is activated. Beyond IgA, regular orgasm is associated with reductions in systemic inflammatory markers, including C-reactive protein and certain interleukins, that, when chronically elevated, contribute to the development and progression of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, cognitive decline, and cancer. The mechanism is partly hormonal, connected to the effects of oxytocin and endorphins on the immune system, and partly neurological, connected to the parasympathetic activation that follows orgasm and the corresponding reduction in the cortisol-driven inflammatory state that chronic stress. For men over 60 who are already dealing with the natural immunosenescence, which is the age-related decline in immune function that accompanies aging, and who are more vulnerable to infectious illness, slower recovery, and the consequences of chronic inflammation, this matters. Every natural, regular source of immune support is meaningful, and the cessation of sexual activity represents the loss of one that is available at no cost, with no side effects, and with benefits that extend well beyond the immune system. The chronic inflammation piece deserves particular emphasis in men over 60. We now understand that low-grade, persistent systemic inflammation is one of the primary biological drivers of the conditions that most threaten health and longevity in this age group: cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, and certain cancers. Anything that consistently and measurably reduces inflammatory load is therefore a meaningful contributor to long-term health. The evidence that regular sexual activity does exactly that is part of a growing body of research that positions sexual health not as a peripheral concern in aging men, but as a central one. Consequence 7. Loss of body ownership, diminished self-worth, and disconnection from vitality. This final consequence is perhaps the most difficult to quantify, but in my clinical experience, it is often the one that affects men most deeply and most pervasively. There's something that happens when a man completely ceases all forms of physical self-care and self-intimacy. A kind of internal message is sent and received that this body is no longer worth tending to in this way, that this dimension of the self is finished, that vitality, pleasure, and physical aliveness are things that belong to a different chapter of life that is now closed. That message, wherever it comes from, whether from cultural conditioning, from the loss of a partner, from grief, from embarrassment, or simply from the gradual erosion of habit, does damage that goes beyond the physiological. It affects how a man moves through the world, how much he invests in his own health and appearance, how connected he feels to his body, and how much he believes he still has to experience and enjoy. Men who have stopped treating their bodies as living, responsive, worth caring for organisms often become more passive in other areas of health too. Less likely to exercise, less invested in nutrition, less engaged socially. As if the withdrawal from physical self-care signals a broader withdrawal from the project of being fully alive. Reconnecting with the body through gentle, private, unhurried self-intimacy is, in this context, not merely a physical act. It is an act of reclaiming aliveness, of sending the opposite message. This body is still here, still worth attention, still capable of feeling, and still deserving of care. So, what should you actually do with all of this? Here is what I recommend to the men I work with clinically. Begin by releasing the shame and the cultural noise around this topic entirely. What I have described today is not a moral matter, it is a health matter. Approach it in exactly the same spirit you would approach any other health practice that your body benefits from, with consistency, without guilt, and without needing to explain yourself to anyone. If shame has been a barrier, I want you to understand where that shame comes from. It comes from cultural and sometimes religious messaging that was never designed with your physiological health in mind. It has nothing to do with the clinical reality of what your body needs and how it functions. You are allowed to set it aside. Reintroduce regular sexual self-care gradually and without pressure. There is no target frequency that is universally correct, and the goal is not performance. It is maintenance. It is keeping the prostate fluid moving, the pelvic floor contracting, the neurochemical cycles functioning, and the blood flowing through the erectile tissue. Whatever frequency accomplishes that for your body is the right frequency. For some men, that may be several times per week. For others, it may be once a week or less. What matters is regularity and consistency over time, rather than any specific number. Pay deliberate attention to your pelvic floor outside of sexual activity as well. Simple, regular Kegel exercises, which involve contracting and holding the muscles you would use to stop urination midstream, support pelvic floor strength, and complement the benefits of regular sexual activity for bladder control and erectile function. Pair sexual self-care with the broader lifestyle practices that consistently support vascular and hormonal health. Regular physical activity, a diet rich in vegetables, whole grains, legumes, and oily fish, adequate restorative sleep, managed stress, and regular engagement with your doctor around blood pressure, blood sugar, and cholesterol. And observe your own responses over time. Men who reintroduce regular sexual self-care after a period of absence frequently report improvements in sleep quality within the first 2 to 3 weeks. Improved mood and emotional engagement follow consistently. Many notice meaningful improvements in urinary function and pelvic comfort over longer periods of sustained practice. Your body will tell you in ways you can genuinely feel from week to week that this matters and that the investment is paying off. The men I work with who embrace this conversation, who let go of the cultural shame long enough to take their own physiology seriously, consistently describe a sense of reclaiming something. Not youth precisely, but vitality, presence, a feeling of being fully inhabiting their own lives rather than merely observing them pass. Age is not the end of vitality. It is a different and distinct chapter of it, one that still has much to offer if you give your body the conditions it needs to continue thriving. And your body right now is doing everything it can to support your health and your well-being. Give it the conditions it needs to do that well. I am Dr. Julia Rhodes, a men's sex therapist with over a decade of experience working with different couples and helping men regain their sexual health and strength back. If today's video gave you something genuinely useful and important, please do 3 things right now. Hit the like button because it helps more men in their later years find content that could meaningfully support their health. Leave a comment below and share one thing from today's video that surprised you or that you are going to act on, because I read every comment and your responses shape this community. And subscribe with notifications on if you have not already done so, because every single week I am here with the honest, evidence-based, clinically grounded content on men's health that you deserve. Your body is still here, still present, and still absolutely worth caring for. Start today. I will see you in the next video.